So I get many, many questions from people about fearful avoidance and sex. And I get these questions around people who are dating fearful avoidance, people who are in situationships with fearful avoidance, but especially fearful avoidance themselves, who may at times around sex related topics feel triggered or frustrated or confused about their needs or boundaries or different dynamics. So in this video, we're going to cover a lot of the major core wounds and triggers for fearful avoidance so that you can get clear about what these things are, why they're happening, what's showing up for you, and also about some steps that you can take to move through this, and some healthy relationship dynamics that will be really powerful to implement in your relationship to sex as a whole. Some of the biggest things that come up and trigger fearful avoidance in the relationship to sex is feelings of being um, not good enough or defective in some way. Now, what I mean by this is not that that's what you are, not that a fearful avoidant is defective in a relationship to sex or is not good enough, but that these core wounds, when imprinted upon the subconscious mind because of past trauma, are things that are likely to arise, especially in intimate and vulnerable situations. So, if as a child you grew up and in your attachment bonding, you had a sense of feeling a lot of shame because your needs weren't met, or you were made to feel defective in a certain way, or if you were made to feel not good enough and like you couldn't get your needs met just as you were, then these are, I don't want to say ticking time bombs, but these are things that are basically waiting to come back up in different future situations that also mirror the level and degree of vulnerability you felt as a child. So sex would be one of those things. Sex can be a very vulnerable, very intimate thing. In certain cases, I'll see fearful avoidance just like sort of disconnect from the emotional and vulnerable part of intimacy around sex and make sex like body based sex and just about connection, feeling wanted, things like that. And that's fine. Like, I'm not here to say what's right or wrong in any way. But what matters and what becomes healthy or unhealthy is your personal relationship to that. Like, are you doing that because you're afraid, or are you doing that because that's your truth and you're in a place where you're exploring things from a sexual perspective? So, if it's because you're afraid of vulnerability, afraid of opening up, afraid of emotional and physical and sexual intimacy, or have core wounds around it, then you want to do the work there to support yourself, so that you're not coping in your relationship to sex. So, anyways, one of the big things that will come up is a lot of that like defectiveness or self shaming around sex. And when a fearful avoidant is doing that, usually it exists in the case of like body shaming or being very critical or feeling like you're not something enough, fill in the blank enough, around sex. And that can make sex like a very uncomfortable experience. It can make it that you're not present, you're not in the moment, you're not really feeling connected to yourself or the other person. But instead, sex is this like result oriented thing you're trying to complete, get done, get out of the way. You feel pressure around, and it can really take that intimacy part out of the relationship to sex. So if you see some of those things, you really want to work on the core wounds. I am defective. I'm not good enough. Even I am unworthy will come in there a lot. Now, there's a few other ones. Some other big ones that can show up is sometimes fearful avoidance, similar to anxious, preoccupied individuals, may make their relationship to sex about avoiding abandonment. Like being, like even if a fearful avoidant doesn't feel like having sex or doesn't want to have sex, or maybe isn't in the emotional connection place to have sex, like maybe they don't feel enough emotional connection from somebody to want to be sexual with them, but they're afraid of losing the person. Sometimes sex and the relationship to sex can be driven by fearing abandonment. And again, it just comes back to this dynamic of like, we're the healthiest when we're in our truth, right? So if I'm making any decision in my life as a person, whether it's to work in a certain job or to do whatever it is, if I'm making it from truth, I'm aligned. If I'm making it from fear of something bad happening, and that's fear that's really driving my decision and my relationship to something, then it ends up hurting me long term. Like if I jump into a job because I'm afraid I won't get another job, but it's something I don't like, there's inherent pain that comes with that decision over time. And the same principle applies to a fearful avoidant in the relationship to sex. Like if you're trying to sleep with somebody because of a fear of abandonment, it's fear driven, right? It's not, hey, do I want to sleep with them? What's my truth? Where am I at? What are my needs? And so there's this sort of like self abandonment that takes place in this strategy at a subconscious level to avoid abandonment. So that can be a really big thing that can show up. Another thing will be that fearful avoidance if they ever feel like somebody doesn't see them or know them, and understand like their sexual boundaries inherently. Sometimes fearful avoidance can feel betrayed. And so it's really important as an FA that you advocate for your sexual boundaries. Sometimes fearful avoidance will expect people to know things because fearful avoidance are very insightful and really good at reading between the lines, but that's not every other attachment style. So communication will be really important. And upholding your boundaries and letting somebody know your boundaries will be really important in terms of this dynamic. And then one last big core wound that can show up, actually, there's a couple, but one can be this power struggle dynamic. Sometimes fearful avoidance will get into a sexual relationship and feel like sex is about, did they give their power away? Are they retaining their power? And again, like everybody's relationship to sex is independent, but generally if there's some kind of struggle involved, like it's like you're using sex as a tool, you're not in healthy relationship to sex. You're using it to deal with or to cope with some other dynamic that's taking place at a subconscious level. And that's a cry for healing, right? That's a cry for, hey, what is that? What's going on there? Can you show up and care for that part of yourself, right? It's going to be really important to feel personally empowered instead of feeling like you derive power from if you feel wanted or if you are not sleeping with somebody to sort of have that power over somebody. It should be made from like, I'm sleeping with somebody or not sleeping with somebody because I'm clear about my boundaries and what my needs are as a person and coming from that like peaceful orientation, if that makes sense. And I'll share two other ones that can really show up here. But two other core wounds that can show up. But if you want to do a deep dive in your relationship to sex, if you have core wounds that are playing into it, you're not clear about your boundaries sexually, you find yourself sometimes moving from fear instead of truth, we have a whole course just about attachment styles and sex. And we cover the fearful avoidant in so much detail, the patterns that will come up, the healthy ones, the not so healthy ones, and then exactly what you need to do to move through the healthy ones so you can really have a healthy, rooted relationship to yourself here. And of course, that translates into healthy sexual relationships with others. So you can check that out for free for 14 days. We're doing a 14-day free trial for Black Friday. It's limited time. We won't be offering this on an ongoing basis. So you can check it out using the link below. And that link actually also gives you access to the whole school at PDS, including the 4 live weekly webinars I do with our students. So you can jump in there, ask me questions on video. We can chat. You can type them if you don't want to come on video as well, or just leave your camera off and do audio, whatever is most comfortable. So anyways, that link is below. And then a couple other dynamics that are very important to notice is that fearful avoidants can sometimes feel trapped in the relationship to sex, especially if they're not advocating for their boundaries. They can also feel I am bad, like a lot of shame around sex just because they've got the I am bad core wound that's coming up. And that's such an important wound to reprogram, because sex is not bad, right? But if we make ourselves bad because of sex, then it just becomes this, again, painful experience. It's our relationship to sex that's healthy or unhealthy, not us having sex, right? It's like what our boundaries are. Are we attuned to ourselves? Do we know what our needs are? Are we having healthy communication around sex? Like all of those things are very healthy and important. And one other thing that can show up a lot for fearful avoidance is sometimes like perfectionism around themselves, like their appearance, how they look, just everything related to sex having to be very perfect when like that's anything really vulnerable is never going to be perfect. Whether it's like, sex, whether it's communication, whether it's, us opening up and sharing something personal, like it comes with a lack of perfection, and that's important. And often that's something that makes us more connected to somebody over time, because when we present that side of ourselves, we also receive love, right? We receive connection for our imperfections, which is very healing. It's a very important thing to experience. So that is also in that course, like how to work through that, how to be more mindful of that. And we also have a perfectionism course as well, and all about perfectionism and also the fear of losing control. Because sometimes fearful avoidants try to really control themselves, not so much others. Though in some cases that can happen sometimes, but really like controlling of themselves and how they show up and how everything is, um, that can be very exhausting for a fearful avoidant to carry around for a long period of time. So you can check out all those courses for free for 14 days. You'll definitely be able to get through one, if not two, every 7 days. Every course is like an hour and a half long, 2 hours. So you can sit down, unpack it, do the workbook exercises if you've got some time. And in the very least, you can like take a look through and print off the workbooks or things like that. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you're getting a lot of value, and I will see you in the next video.